Hello and welcome to this video, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters in Christ. My name is Lars Haukeland, and I am going to record the first of a series of videos about Easter. So this is kind of like an introduction to the Easter message. Now, I'm hoping to do 3 videos this Easter. I will do 3 videos, but because I don't know how much I'm working and how busy I'll be with other things, I can't promise that the third video will come at Easter, maybe after Easter. But today I'm looking at the introduction. The next video will be about Palm Sunday, and the third video will be about, leading up till the crucifixion and that. So we'll be looking at these things. Today we'll be in John chapter 12, and before I start reading there, let me mention that John's gospel is quite a bit different from the other gospels. It has a lot of unique things that you don't find in the other gospels, and the first 11 chapters are talking about the life of Jesus, his 3 years of ministry here on earth. Doesn't mention his birth besides the introduction that you read in John chapter 1. That is more like a general introduction. But then the last chapters, from chapter 12 through chapter 21, it's mostly talking about that last week of Jesus here on this earth. It leads up to the crucifixion and the resurrection. And John was very particular about this, and he focused very much on this. And no wonder, Jesus is the most important man in our planet's history. We live today in the year 2024, Anno Domini AD, which means in the year of our Lord. Of course, Jesus was born a little bit before 2024 years ago, a little bit before that. But never mind that. That's what happens when you try to make a calendar after things and events have already taken place. But today we'll be looking at 5 reactions to Jesus Christ. Pardon me. We'll be looking at Martha's service. We've been looking at Mary's sacrifice. We've been looking just briefly at Simon, which also is in John chapter 12. Also, we'll be talking about Judas' hypocritical interest that he had, and we'll look a little bit at the masses, the big crowds that was following Jesus around, and all these had different reactions to Jesus as he was here on earth. So let me read these verses, starting in John chapter 12, verse 1. Then Jesus, 6 days before the Passover, came to Bethany, where Lazarus was, which had been dead, whom he had raised from the dead. There they made him a supper, and Martha served, but Lazarus was one of them that sat at the table with him. Then took Mary a pound of ointment of spikenard, very costly, and anointed the feet of Jesus, and wiped his feet with her hair. And the house was filled with the odor of the ointment. Then saith one of his disciples, Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, which should betray him, why was not this ointment sold for 300 pence and given to the poor? This he said, not that he cared for the poor, but because he was a thief, and had the bag, and bare that was put therein. Then said Jesus, Let her alone. Against the day of my burying hath she kept this. For the poor always ye have with you, but me ye have not always. Much people of the Jews therefore knew that he was there, and they came not for Jesus' sake only, but that they might see Lazarus also, whom he had raised from the dead. But the chief priests consulted that they might put Lazarus also to death, because that by reason of him many of the Jews went away and believed on Jesus. Now that's the passage of scripture that I'll be looking at today. And Jesus came, and it's so astonishing to me still to this day that Jesus said that he came not to bring peace, but to bring a sword. And this sounds really strange, but that's what happens in a family when somebody gets saved, and they are the only one that is saved, and everybody else is not unsaved. And then it brings conflict to that family when they don't believe the same things. Religious differences is that's one of the most important reasons for problems in marriages when the spouses have different faith. It's not good, and it brings a lot of arguments, and it brings a sword. It brings problems. It brings conflict. So when we're told that in the Beatitudes that we are peacemakers, that's talking about spiritually, that we're helping people to make peace with God. It doesn't say that we're going to bring peace and win the Nobel Peace Prize and that kind of stuff in the world. No, actually, we'll bring a lot of trouble. And when we live according to God's word, we actually end up facing problems in a great variety of ways, and also persecution. Maybe not here in Norway where I'm sitting right now, but other places Christians are dying for their faith. So it does bring a sword, but we have these opposites when we look into the to the Bible here. We find people that have dedication to God. We find those that reject God. We find those that worship God. We find those that blaspheme God. We find those that have faith, and we find those that are doubting. We find believers on the one side. We find non-believers on the other side. We find sheep on the one side. We find goats on the other side. We find wheat and corn on the one side. We find weeds on the other side. We find God's child or God's children on the one side, and we find the devil's children on the other side. As far back as Genesis chapter 1, we find that there is light and there is darkness, and God separates the light from the darkness, and that's how it's supposed to be. John says that Jesus came, and he came as the second person of the Trinity, and he was the promised and prophesied Messiah, and he would come back to rule the world one day, and he will establish justice on the earth one day. So quite a few thoughts there with John are futuristic, and it's talking about something that is yet future for us. So we're in John chapter 12, verse 1 through 11, and this is the opening, then you can say, of Jesus's last week before he got crucified. Now he had raised Lazarus from the dead in John chapter 11. And this is something that everybody knew. Lazarus was well known in Bethany, and Bethany is about 3 kilometers or so east of Jerusalem. And the raising of Lazarus is probably the greatest miracle that Jesus ever did. And it had great implications. And that was like the last big miracle that he did before he got crucified. And he knew that when he did this, people would notice him, and people would come and they would the masses and the crowds will come after him because they wanted to see more miracles. We are that way, us humans. We like to be entertained. They didn't necessarily come because they wanted to follow him and believe in him, but they wanted to be entertained by him. So this last great miracle had great implications on his life. And the word likely spread to Jerusalem. We knew that there were crowds coming from Jerusalem that had heard about him. And verse number 9 mentions a great crowd. Much people of the Jews therefore knew that he was there, and they came not for Jesus' sake only, but that they might see Lazarus also, whom he had raised from the dead. So this was a big thing, and everybody wanted to see Lazarus, and they wanted to see Jesus as well, and hopefully see him do miracles. They wanted to see these two. Now, the religious leaders did not deny the raising of Lazarus from the dead. They wanted to just limit the damage, what they call damage control. They planned to kill Jesus publicly. In chapter 11, if you're in there, just look at verse 53. It says, "Then from that day forth they took counsel together for to put him to death." They wanted him dead. And we'll be looking a little bit at the end of chapter 11 as well. So Jesus at this time could not walk openly among the people. So he went into a lonely place. He went into the desert. 11:54 says Jesus therefore walked no more openly among the Jews, but went thence unto a country near to the wilderness, into a city called Ephraim, and there continued with his disciples. So he had to separate himself from the big crowds, because they were really pressing on him at this point after he did this great miracle. Now, we don't really know how long Jesus was in the wilderness here. It could be days, it could have been weeks, maybe even months. Don't really know. But we do know that when we come to chapter 12 and verse 1, it says, "Then Jesus 6 days before the Passover came to Bethany." So we know that this is 6 weeks before the Passover, before Easter. So that now we have a proper time limit on it. And the people were searching for Jesus at this time. Verse 56 in chapter 11 says, "Then sought they after Jesus, who spake among them, and spake among themselves, as they stood in the temple, What think ye? Will he not come to the feast?" So Jesus was at this time the most popular man in the entire country. There was no other like him. And they waited for him to come to celebrate Easter. And they were thinking maybe he would come early to prepare for Easter. And he said, "What do you think? What do you think? Will he come at all? With so many people looking for him. And people wanting to see him killed. Will he actually show up?" In chapter 11, verse 57, it says, "Now both the chief priests and the Pharisees had given a commandment that if any man knew where he were, he should show it, that they might take him." They wanted to arrest him. So this is what happens when it leads up till to chapter 12 and the story of Easter. Jesus came back, but it wasn't just God's timing. Jesus sometimes says that my time is not yet. And, he was supposed to die at a very specific time. He said that his hour hadn't come yet. He would die when the Jews slaughtered the Easter lamb. That's the time when he wanted to die. So you find pieces here of the the old pact and the new pact. Now, the old pact says that's the old Easter, you could say, with the Passover that they celebrated from Egypt, and they have the Passover lamb. If you recall, they took the blood from a lamb and smeared it round the doors, so that the angel of death would not come in and kill the firstborn of the family. So that's Passover means just that, passing over. And that's the old pact. But the new pact is a new Easter. And that is all about the resurrection of Jesus. So the Easter we celebrate today is not the Passover from Egypt. The Jews still celebrate that. But we Christians, we celebrate the resurrection of Christ. So Jesus, he caused faith for Mary and Lazarus and Martha and one more. Now, Judas is a special character in all this, and he was like hatefully despising Jesus, and he fell away, you could say. And it wasn't just him that showed animosity, it was also the leadership in Israel. They were also hostile against Jesus. Now, everybody had a different view on Jesus. Now, how could this be? Well, we're all different, and we all view things differently. And it depends, who we are and what our goals are in life. But, why did the leaders want him dead? They didn't believe he was the Messiah. They thought that he made himself out to be God. We still have these views today that I'm going to mention to you now. But, people, when they hear about Jesus, they think different things. They look at him differently. And some believe, just a faithful few believe, and many do not believe. Now, 6 days before Easter, the crowd wanted to see miracles, and the leaders wanted to arrest him. I already said that. And he came to Bethany, and he was still known. There was still a buzz all over the place because of the miracle with Lazarus, raising him from the dead. And it was special because he had been dead for 4 days. So it wasn't that he just shocked him back to life. He was proper dead for quite a while. And he also came because he was supposed to be sacrificed as the Easter lamb. He wanted to spend time with his friends before all this happened at Easter. Because he loved these people. He loved Mary, he loved Martha, he loved Lazarus. And maybe Simon too, that's very likely. I mean, he's probably the one that healed him. But I'll be back to that after. 6 days before the crown of thorns, we read here the first words of Judas in the Bible. What a thief and liar he was, and how he must have hated Jesus. Though we don't read a lot about Judas Iscariot in the Bible, but he is an interesting character. But what it says about Judas is very bad. It's pretty bad. But let's look at Martha first. Martha was known for serving. You probably know her as a great servant. Now, in Luke chapter 10, we read the story of, verse 38. It came to pass when they went that that's Jesus, entered into a certain village, and a certain woman named Martha received him into her house, and she had a sister called Mary, which also sat at Jesus' feet and heard the word. But Martha was cumbered about much serving, and came to him and said, Lord, dost thou not care that my sister hath left me to serve alone? bid her therefore that she help me. And you probably know this story. You probably heard this, and this is how we know Martha. She's a worker. She's a workaholic, you could say, but she is also a servant. Now, we have really given Martha a bad reputation. We say that, Mary chose the best thing. She sat down to listen to Jesus, but Martha was busy doing stuff. And, it would have been better for her to listen to what Jesus had to say. We've heard her being criticized many times, both from the pulpit and when we speak among ourselves. But I want you to think of something here. Now, Martha was committed to service. Now, we know that Mary chose to focus on the spiritual, and Martha probably chose to focus on the physical as such. And serve here means to wait on tables. It's a word that means waiting on tables. And diakoneo is the Greek word that we get the word deacon from. And that is really, it's a type of servant, but it's used about someone who leads the church's care work, or arranges practical things in the church. And it's also used as deacon in Acts chapter 6. And in Romans 16, it's talking about all who served, and that's also talking about the diakoneo. Now, we shouldn't down-talk those who serve, because they are so important, not only in the church, but in our families as well. Now, it says here in John chapter 12 that they were coming for a supper. Now, the word deipnon actually means a feast. This is talking about the biggest, most important meal, and it was a big thing. They were like, Jesus was coming, and they just pulled out all the stops. They just put everything on the table that they had. They were going to make it not just a small meal, but a big feast. And then they put the tables all together and shaped like a U. And then they would, the participants, they would lay on couches, like the Romans did. That's how they did it in here as well. And they would lay with their head closest to the table so they could reach the table. This meal was actually not in Martha's home. You can check Matthew chapter 26, verses 6 through 13, and Mark chapter 14, verse 3 through 9. But they did have a great meal, and Martha was serving. And, where would we be? What we would get done in our churches if we didn't have people who served? We need people like Martha. Then we have Simon the Leper. I put him before Mary here, but Simon the Leper, we don't read that much about him right here in this passage, but Simon the Leper also lived in Bethany, and he was called Simon the Leper earlier as we meet him, and he was probably not a leper now. He must have been healed from it now, or else he wouldn't be able to partake in this supper. So you have Simon, that was a former leper. You have Lazarus, which is a former dead. So what a fascinating conversation they could have had. I would have liked to be the fly on the wall to listen to what they said. Now, leprosy was a real problem in the old days. Now, here in Bergen, in the west of Norway, we have the Lepra Museum, because the man who found the leprosy bacillus in 1874, he was Norwegian, and they found a way of treating leprosy, But there are still places today where you have leprosy. You have India and Vietnam and the Philippines, for instance. They have quite a few lepers there. And of course, in the old days when they had leprosy, you had to colonize them. You had to put them in colonies. You had to keep your distance from them so you didn't catch it. And they had to go around and shout, unclean, unclean, when they were walking around, so that nobody got too close to them by chance. But imagine, he was probably healed by Jesus, and Lazarus was raised by Jesus. And when they had this big meal, this feast they were having, it was not for Simon's honor, it was not for Lazarus' honor, it was for Jesus' honor. It was all for Jesus. And of course, Martha is serving like she normally does. She will always be remembered for this, In Matthew chapter 20, let's see, Matthew chapter 20, verse 26 through 29, it says, "But it shall not be so among you, but whosoever will be great among you, let him be your minister. And whosoever will be chief among you, let him be your servant. Even as the Son of Man came not to be ministered unto, but to minister, and to give his life a ransom for many." And also Luke chapter 22. See here. Luke chapter 22 and verse 27 says, "For whether is greater, he that sitteth at meat, or he that serveth? Is not he that sitteth at meat, but I among you as he that serveth? I am among you as he that serveth." So Jesus said that he was serving. And we know that he washed the disciples' feet. And, he just was a servant, not because he had to be a servant. He is God. He can do pretty much what he wants to. But he did this as a picture to us that we should be servants. And we should be watching servants as well. Luke chapter 12, verse 37 says, "Blessed are those servants whom the Lord, when he cometh, shall find watching. Verily I say unto you, that he shall gird himself and make them to sit down to meat, and will come forth to serve them." So these servants are watching. This is talking about watching for the future and being ready for the second coming of Christ. We also have Acts chapter 1. If I can find it here. I didn't put anything in here to find it. There we go. Acts chapter 1 and verse 19 says, "And it was known unto all the dwellers at Jerusalem, insomuch as that field is called in the proper tongue Akaldama, which is to say the field of blood." Okay, that was not what I wanted, because I'm in the wrong chapter. I do apologize. I do mess up with these things, especially when I haven't found the scripture verse beforehand. It was not chapter 1, it was chapter 20 and verse 19. It says that, "Serving the Lord with all humility of mind, and with many tears and temptations, which befell me by the lying in wait of the Jews." Okay, this is Paul talking now. So, many refuses to be a servant, but that is what we are supposed to be. We are supposed to be humble and helpful. 2 H's there. Right, let's go on a little bit and talk about Mary's sacrifice now. And I'm going to go back to verse 3 of chapter 12 in John. Then took Mary a pound of ointment of spikenard, very costly, and anointed the feet of Jesus, and wiped his feet with her hair, and the house was filled with the odor of ointment. So here we have the Nardus ointment, okay? Mary here shows her love for Jesus, and this is an illustration of sacrifice and total dedication in love. Now, Nardon, or should I say Muron, means oil, and Nardus pistikos is Nardus ointment or oil. It's kind of like an oily ointment, you could say. And the nard or the Nardus came all the way from China, Tibet, or India, and it was very rare. And just imagine, it was carried by camels from far, far away to get to the Middle East. And it says that, you know, it cost 300 denarii, or what's it say here? It says pence here, but verse 5, why was not this ointment sold for 300 pence? And pence is denarius, which is Roman silver coins, and each one is equal to a day's labor. So you're talking here about 300 days of labor. So it takes a year to be able to afford this ointment, okay? So it wasn't just some ointment they just found that, you know, was cheap, and you know, they got plenty of bottles in the bathroom. It's not that kind of thing. It's something that was really rare, and they normally kept it for the time when they had to bury their family members. And so it's 1 year's wages. And in Matthew chapter 26 and verse 7, it talks about an alabaster box. Now, this is a white see-through rock that they used to make boxes out of. This oil was a very potent oil used for funerals, as I said. And Judas, he knew how expensive this was. He knew it straight away. And Mary's heart was just overwhelmed by love and gratitude towards Jesus. And so she loosened up her hair, and this is something which is quite radical to do if you're in public, because it was considered shameful. But she used her hair to wipe Jesus's feet, and they always washed their feet before meals, and they were walking around with sandals lots of the time, and sometimes they didn't even have sandals, and their feet got filthy. Now, we have a similar story in Luke chapter 7, verse 36 through 50. I'm not going to read it, for it's too long, but it's a similar story, but note that it's a different woman, okay? We know this because of, you know, what time, where it's taken place and everything. Now, a Pharisee would not be touched by such a woman. And this is using this salve is like a pompous way of showing care. Okay. So let me go and talk a little bit about Judas. Now, Judas, you know, if you got a nickname, would you like to be called, you know, in the same breath as they say your name, he who betrayed Jesus, he who was going to betray Jesus? That was Judas. And Judas is called the son of perdition in John chapter 17, verse 12. This means fallen, you know. some say that it's almost as bad as saying he was the son of hell, you know. And he went to his own place, it says in Acts, that was chapter 1, but verse 25. He went to hell, and he was called the son of hell. And he went to his own place, which was called, which they say is hell. Now, John 6:70 says that Jesus, when he was talking about somebody that would betray him, he said, "One of you is a devil." Now, these are harsh words, guys. These are harsh words. He was considered to be a devil. He was greedy, he was ambitious, he was worldly, and he was egoistic. In verse 5 and 6, we see John's explanation. This he said, verse 6, not that he cared for the poor, but because he was a thief and had the bag. I mean, he was keeping the money for the disciples and Jesus, and bear what was put therein. So he took what was in it. So this is John's explanation. Now, Matthew chapter 26 and verse 8 says that the disciples were with him, meaning with Jesus, but it's kind of like a separation here. Judas was kind of like not really one of the crowd because he was quite different. And these are the first words we read that Judas says. And it's not very good what we read. The last words of what he said is also in Matthew, but in chapter 27. In Matthew 27 and verse 4, it says, saying, I have sinned in that I have betrayed the innocent blood. And they said, what is that to us? See thou to that. So I realized that he had betrayed innocent blood, but, you know, he's still called a devil. So we know that God used him, but if he's called a devil, then he must have had a wickedness in him. I mean, who doesn't before they get saved? But it seems like he might not have been saved. It's hard to say. But that's his last words, and he wanted to steal Mary's love offering. So he sold Jesus for 30 coins of silver. Okay? So this is not a good person. And the Bible does have things to say about him, but this message is not just about Judas, so I'm not going to go there. Now, we see Jesus' response in verse 7. Let her alone. Against the day of my burying has she kept this. And we know that from this that Mary is preparing Jesus for his funeral. Did Mary know this? We don't really know. It could be that she was more alert. She was sitting at Jesus' feet and listening. Maybe she understood more than the disciples. I mean, it wasn't long after this that Jesus was crucified, and the apostles, or should I say the disciples, they were just, wow, I don't know, how could this happen? And Jesus had told them again and again that he would die. So but did Mary know it? Maybe she did, maybe she didn't. It doesn't really say, so we can't really say that. But we know how Jesus interpreted this. He saw this as ointment being put on him before his burial. He saw it as this. This was a symbol of the coming death that was coming. And Mark chapter 14 verse 9 is a testimony to Mary. Let's see. I didn't find that either, did I? Mark, if I can find Mark, he's so small, poor guy. 14 verse 9, Verily I say unto you, wheresoever this gospel shall be preached through the whole world, this also that she hath done shall be spoken of for a memorial for her. Okay. Well, this makes us ask the question, how much do we sacrifice to God? Mary used an ointment that took a year to pay for. Would we be willing to give a year's wages to God? Verse 8 says, But the poor always ye have with you, but me ye have not always. So it is right to help the poor, but that's just a temporary help. We need to think eternally, and we must know the difference. We need to know what's most important. So what is great is if we help the poor at the same time as we preach and evangelize to the poor. That's the best thing. Now the last point is the crowd. Verse number 9. Much people of the Jews therefore knew that he was there, and they came not for Jesus' sake only, but that they might see Lazarus also, whom he had raised from the dead. So the crowd wanted to see Lazarus. That said, it's already been, he'd been dead for 4 days, and Jesus raised him from the dead. And also they wanted to see Jesus, who had done these things and who could perform miracles. And if you go down to verse 12, it says that on the next day, much people that were come to the feast, when they heard that Jesus was coming to Jerusalem. So we see that there's always, crowds trying to find Jesus, especially after that last big miracle that he did. But they were so excited, and they wanted to be entertained, and they wanted to see him, and they were so happy that they actually wanted to make him a king on Palm Sunday. But it didn't take long before the cries turned, and they turned to crucify him. So the crowd as such were hollow, they were superficial people, and when we see verse 10 and verse 11, we see that the chief priests, they didn't just want to kill Jesus, but now they also wanted to kill Lazarus, because Lazarus was the proof of Jesus' power. He was, like I say, probably the biggest miracle that Jesus did. And the high priest, they planned to take Jesus' life. They wanted to kill Lazarus as well, so that Lazarus died again. But trying to pull this all together then at the end of this video, Martha, great servant, was serving the Lord from dawn to dusk. Mary, full of love for the Lord, just soaking in whatever he has to say. Simon, so thankful that he has been healed by Jesus. And Judas, the hypocrite that is falling and worldly. And the crowds then, very, very indifferent when it comes to how they view Jesus. And you also have a sixth one actually as well. You have the religious leaders, which would like to persecute Jesus and wanted to kill him and see him sacrificed and put on the cross. So this is those are the views. These are kind of like an introduction video till the Easter subject, and the next video I will make will be called it's Easter 2, and that would be about Palm Sunday, which is the next thing that happens here from verse 12 and out. So we'll be looking at Palm Sunday next time. If you want to see more videos that I've written, recorded, should I say. I am a writer more than anything else, but if you want to see more videos, you go to revlarsvideos.wordpress.com, or you can just search for them on YouTube. So hope this was interesting for you. Maybe you learned something new. I hope so. God be with you till we meet again.